before we start mixing anything, we need to make sure that our DAW, of which we choose to use for our mix, is set accordingly. For this course, I'm going to be using Pro Tools. The reason to use Pro Tools, I find on personal reasons, is because of its customization in terms of the actual layout of the session. Pro Tools, you don't really get given anything. You have to make everything that you want, kind of like designing your own analog console, which is great for mixing. It's also really good to use a different DAW to something that you would normally produce in for that mindset of mixing. So to start off with, we're going to need to make sure that there's a few things we have in our session to mix. So we're going to start making a template for this. Now, this could be a template that you have across the board of all genres and all styles, or it could be one of the templates that you choose to make for specific styles. So maybe one for house music, one for drum and bass, one for dubstep, and so on. This is going to be a generic start to a template for electronic dance music. And like I said, there's a few things that you're going to need to have in the session to start with to make sure that you can do things efficiently and have consistency in the sound. Now, a few of these is the structure of the outputs or the auxiliaries. Now, as you can see in Pro Tools, there's nothing within the session. This is a completely blank session, and we're going to build it from the ground up with the understanding of what we need to start the mix to get things done quickly. So the first thing you can do is to set up your outputs. In order to do this in Pro Tools, there's a few key commands that are really good to understand. Now, one of these is Shift, Command, and N. This will now bring up your new tracks window. This is where you can make as many new tracks as you like and decide how those tracks are, whether they're mono, stereo, what kind of track they are, auxiliaries or submixes and so on. So first of all, we're going to make a stereo master fader. This we definitely know we're going to need because we're going to need to hear something at the end and be able to control what we hear at the end. The next thing we're going to do is set up a few different mix buses. So we're going to think about maybe having a couple of different choices of mix for our processing. So here we can go stereo and have two auxiliary faders, and we're going to call these mix faders. This will make sense in a minute. We're going to have three of these just to be on the safe side. We may never use them, but this is what we can do with them. Now, as you can see from here, we've got a master fader and we've got mix 1, mix 2, and mix 3. This is just options. It doesn't mean we need to use these. This is just good to have as options. Now, these can be used in a variety of different ways. You can have these as varying processes on each of these tracks, or you can have these to lay your mixes down onto. So first mix you have as an audio file once it's printed, second mix, and so on. Or like I said before, we could use these as various processing options. Now, first of all, we need to make sure that all of our tracks are going to the master fader, which we have as standard. This does it for you, but the inputs of these tracks need to be set. Now, in Pro Tools, there's a few key commands again that are very useful to know. If I select all of these three tracks and I want to make these inputs of these ascending numbers, we can press Shift, Option, and Command, and then click whilst we're holding it down onto the input section. If I go to bus and I scroll down, you'll see here I've got a few mixes set up ready as IO labels for my buses. So if I'm still holding this key command down, as you can see from over here, and click mix A, it will then, once I release, give mix 1, mix A's input bus, mix B for mix 2, and mix C for mix 3. I can name these accordingly again if I want to. So instead of having them as 1, 2, and 3, I can say mix A, mix B, and mix C, to go according with my session. The other thing we can do to keep things nice and clear and understanding for our template purposes is color things up accordingly. So at the moment we've got these three mixes set. I'm going to double click on the edge of the track here where you can see its color, and it will bring up the color menu. For now, we're just going to color the tracks. No clips in tracks or groups because we don't have any clips or groups set up yet. So we're just going to click tracks. Now our mixes are, you can pick any color. I'm going to pick this color because I don't really have these colors set up for the input tracks. Again, this will make a lot more sense further down the line. Our master fader now, I'm going to make pure red, just because I know that this is the end. So this is like the danger area. This is where I'm going to be printing those mixes. So now we've got our mix buses set up. We need to think about having our output buses set up. Now these are going to be buses or auxiliaries where all of our individual instruments will end up. So things like our drums as a group, we need to have a bus set up for that. You don't necessarily need to, but when we're dealing with this sort of EMP mix, when we're trying to have efficiency as the main focus point, it's a really good idea to have these buses set up ready. And again, this will come more apparent as we get on into the course. So from the top here, we are going to press our key command, Shift, Command and N to bring up the new tracks. And I'm going to make 8 stereo auxiliary inputs. Now what I'm just going to keep these as aux for the moment. Press OK. It's going to make 8 here. The reason I have 8 is because normally there are 8 different types of sounds within the track. So we're going to start off with renaming these. So the first one I'm going to call drums, the second bass, the next vocals. Then I'm going to have 3 instrument tracks, and I'll explain these in a second. We're then going to have our effects track, and then we're going to have our sends track. So now what we have is 8 separate output buses. At the moment, just like we did with our mix A, B and C, we just have standard inputs here. We need to make our inputs for this. So with the key command again, Shift, Option, Command, I can come to my bus menu, and you can see here at the top of my buses, I've already named the bus's inputs. So instead of it reading things like this, bus 55 to 56, which could get very hard to remember or understand what that actually refers to, I can just hold down Shift, Option and Command and click drum bus, and it will then give these buses, if I just zoom in quickly, drum bus, bass bus, vocal bus, instrument bus 1, 2 and 3, which then correspond to my buses. I'm going to move all of these above. So I'm going to grab all of these tracks, I'm going to move all of these above, and now I'm going to start to colour each of these respective. So our drum bus I'm going to have as red, our bass bus as orange. You can pick whatever colours you want for this, I just have set colours that normally work. Instruments are shades of bluey green, so we have one instrument there, another instrument there, and a darker blue. Those instruments there. Our effects are normally within the green range, and then our sends are usually within the sort of darker purple, deeper purple range. So now what we have is a output section and an input section. Now all of these so far are going to the stereo out. Okay, we can at the start pick a mix bus for these output tracks to go to, or we could have separate separate outputs for each of these. For what I'm going to do for the moment, I'm going to make the drums and the bass go to mix A. So in order to do this, instead of having Shift, Option and Command, which would be ascending, I'm just literally going to press Shift and Alt, and this will make everything selected the same output. So instead of these going out to the master, we're going to pick mix A. So now as you can see, drums and bass go to mix A, so they'll be feeding this. I'm going to make the vocals go to mix B. This can always change at a later date. And then instruments 1, 2, 3, effects, instruments 1, 2 and 3, sorry. So instruments 1, 2 and 3 are going to go to mix B, mix C. So now we have mix A for drums and bass, mix B for vocals, and mix C for our output buses for instruments 1, 2 and 3. Our effects are then going to go straight to our master output. But then this might be a little bit confusing when it comes to things like reference tracks, which depending on the tracks that you'll be mixing, if they're your own or if they're mixes that you're getting from other people, you normally would want to have some kind of reference track to know what the original production sessions sound like. At the moment, if we bring a standard track in, or reference track, and we have our master fader, which will be our last point of action, if we have processors on this, the reference track is going to be processed by those processors, which would mean that that reference track is no longer a true reference. So what we can do is set up something called a submix. So I'm going to set this up underneath my mix A, B and C. This is going to be kind of like our new mix bus fader or our new master fader. So again, standard key commands, Shift and Command N. We're going to set up one more stereo auxiliary fader. This one we're going to name mix bus. I'm going to give this a color. We're going to make this just as red as the main out. Now we've got this as our sort of main out, I'm going to make this a no color track, the master. And instead of calling it master, we're just going to call this main out. Okay, so now what happens is our input bus, our input number for our mix bus, we can go and find, I've already named this submix. So all of our tracks now, our original group outputs are going to be feeding the mix buses, or the actual mix, our mixes that we have, our main primary mixes. And then afterwards, anything that says master output is then going to feed this mix bus instead of feeding the master. So we can go to our effects track, which will go straight to our new mix bus, our sends, which will go straight to the new mix bus, and then all of our primary mixes, so our first stage outputs for our group outs. We can then hold down Shift and Option and then put these out to the submix. So now what we have is all of our tracks, our output sections. We're not hearing anything yet, we're just setting up the structure. We've got drums and bass going to mix A, which then feeds our submix. We've then got vocals, which goes to mix B, which then feeds our submix. We've then got our instruments 1, 2, and 3, which then go to mix C, which feeds our submix. And then we've got effects and sends, which go straight to the submix bus. And then our submix bus goes straight to the master out. This should give us just enough levels of play and processing in order to gain efficient mixing. And again, this will make a lot more sense as we get further into the course.